Well, I want to say a massive welcome to everybody who's joining from different parts of the world. My name is Jonathan Reynolds. I'm the CEO of Titus Talent Strategies and have been your MC host over the last 3 weeks of our three-part webinar series on diversity, equity, and inclusion. The whole intention of this was diversity, equity, and inclusion is not a new thing. This is important. It is critical for organizations, and it's critical for us as humanity to value, honor, respect, and make room for one another and people. Most of our companies are playing on some type of a global stage right now. And so working with valuing and honoring and giving equal opportunity to everyone we interact with is critical, not only as a moral imperative, but as a business imperative. And as the CEO at Titus, I have not had a lens on of looking through with diversity, equity, and inclusion our past 10 years as a company. And this year, because of such a highlight on this topic, and a very important topic, I've said, wow, I actually need to be intentional about this. But as a small business here in the United States, we just wanted to be, as a talent strategy company, we want to be open and transparent about our journey. So we've made a bold statement saying this today is the least diverse we'll ever be. What does that look like practically? We wanted to open up this journey with a bit of a vulnerability and transparency about where we're not happy with where we're at and where we're going and how we're going to get there. So it is a journey for us, and we want to keep opening it up because a lot of companies out there right now are going through the same thing. How do we know something needs to change, but how do we change? So for me, I look in the mirror first and say, personally, how am I changing? And then the mirror of our company. I'm not happy with where we're at. We want to change. So that is it. This is interactive. Please do, right at the bottom of your screens, there's a Q&A button. You can click here to add in your questions. We'll do our best to answer them as we go along through the webinar here. And I am out of here. I'm going. I'm handing over to two phenomenal people on our team. Part of this three-part series, we have different voices from outside of our company, but I wanted to get some insight into two phenomenal people inside our company and how we use some of the tools to reduce and eliminate bias in our hiring. So over to you, Sierra Fletcher, Mike Kuenzi. Take it away and show us how we do this stuff.
All right, how we do this stuff. Okay, well, first I'll introduce myself. I'm Sierra Fletcher. I'm a director with Titus, and I'm our DE&I ambassador. Mike, do you want to introduce yourself? Or do you want to just keep the mystery?
Yes.
Okay.
So my name is Mike Kuenzi. I'm our senior consultant here in our consulting division. And so really excited to be here, appreciative of the opportunity.
Awesome. And I think just to review, if you haven't seen the previous two webinars, the first webinar, we talked about how to jumpstart a sustainable culture of diversity and inclusion. Beth Ridley did that with Jonathan Reynolds. It was phenomenal. And then we partnered with Amplified about fostering engagement through diversity and inclusion. And today we're going to talk about how to put into practice some of these best practices, I guess, as far as removing bias from your hiring process and looking at candidates subjectively. Mike, anything you want to add to that?
No, the main thing that I would say is that Jonathan alluded to it up front, but please, we want this to be as interactive as you'd like. We want to try to get to your questions. There's a Q&A button at the very bottom. We're going to go through quite a few different topics. And so please insert that information in, send it to us. We'll get it. And at the end of this, we're going to make sure we have a Q&A in real time. So get your questions in.
This is hilarious to me. So we're going to talk a lot today about how to remove the thumbs up, thumbs down hiring, how to not hire with just your gut, how to include extra data points into your hiring process so you're finding the right person for your role. The gladiator hiring. Fun fact, hiring with your gut is not reliable. It might feel reliable in the moment, but unstructured interviews are only 6% predictive of performance. You cannot trust your gut. You have to actually interview people.
Yeah, and to add a little bit to that, so when we say unstructured interviews, it's kind of the classic in the industry right now, unfortunately, we look at resumes on average for 6 seconds, make a lot of judgments really quickly based on name and education and when somebody graduated, things along those lines. 6 seconds is that average review. And the hiring manager averages 10 minutes preparing for their interview. So not ultra structured, and that's not going to get us where we need to get, and it's not going to be the most objective process.
Okay, just some fun stats. 80% of turnover is due to bad hiring decisions. So if you're looking to reduce turnover, I know that's a goal I hear from a lot of companies. They want to reduce turnover. Start at the root of the problem. Same theme. 74% of employers say they've hired the wrong person for a position, with the average cost of one bad hire being 30% of the employee's first year earnings. And 33% of employees quit within their first 6 months. That is a huge number.
That one really hits home for me. I mean, you look at this and you put so much time and money and energy into hiring the right person, and all of a sudden they're gone, within that first 6 months. And there's a lot of reasons behind it. So we want to make sure that we walk through how to avoid that to some capacity. And so usually when we're looking at some of these performance indicators, these are historic performance indicators. This was a 100-year study done on kind of what brings top performers in and how we actually measure them. And so historically, we look at things like, hey, where did you go to school? I want to look at your references. What is their GPA? Those are all actually really good measures, but statistically, on the job performance, it's not a really powerful measure when it comes to looking at somebody. It's not saying, hey, don't look at reference checks or don't care about GPA, but it shouldn't be the sole determiner of bringing that individual forward. Some okay predictors, we see this a lot in healthcare, is integrity tests, 21% predictive. And then a more structured interview can be about 34% predictive. And so that is one big piece of the equation. Something that we really recommend is some sort of psychometric assessment to insert something that is, number one, objective, but also adheres to EEOC and OFCCP compliance, but some sort of compliance, behavioral and cognitive assessment. Couple that with a performance-based interview, which we're going to talk about today. That's where you see the results and the probability, that likelihood that somebody will actually perform within that role will really, really increase for you. Sierra, maybe you want to touch on some of these. You work a lot with hundreds of different partners that we have. You probably see some of them unfortunately get lost.
Sure. I mean, misalignment of role, misalignment of who they think would be the right person for this role, misalignment of the performance objectives for the role. So I think a great first step is to really sit down with the hiring manager. If you're in HR, sit down with the hiring manager. If you are the hiring manager, sit down with a colleague or a mentor and just really identify what the role is, what the performance objectives are, which we'll get into a little bit more in a bit, and just really lay it out so that you're not misaligned as you start. And that kind of leads to the next thing. You're attracting the wrong people for the role. And that's because you are misaligned from the start. So if the wrong people are coming to you for this role, it's because you haven't clearly defined what you're looking for, and you haven't put it out to the world what you're looking for. And then the third one, poor hiring decisions. I think that's kind of obvious, but we're making decisions based on, input from others that isn't based on data. It's based on gut feelings or rumors or whatever, but we're relying on things that don't matter. We're relying on our biases to help us make a decision instead of data.
Yeah, you've got, I mean, we've heard it many times, Sierra, where people are like, I can tell in 5 minutes if somebody's going to fit in our company.
I know right away. Yeah.
No, right away. And I'm like, you can't, if they made a good first impression on you, and we definitely we do want you to trust your gut. Absolutely. But not having a defined process is really opening yourself up to those issues that we talked about before that we certainly want to alleviate. And so something that we really believe firmly is the methodology of head, heart, and briefcase. This is how we want you to we want to safeguard the quality of hire that you're bringing on. And so let's start with the briefcase, because historically this is where we tend to gravitate. It's probably the easiest thing to interview for, and it's the easiest thing for a candidate to prepare for, is the professional choices that that person has made, what in their work history has helped mold them and sculpt them and define them. And it really shows us, have they done elements of this job before, and can they do it again? What's more difficult for us to actually measure, and you have to be more intentional about this within your process, is interviewing around the heart. It's value alignment, right? It's somebody's personality. How are they going to mesh within your current company culture? And are they going to be a culture addition, or are they going to be the same carbon copy as everybody else? And so it's harder to interview around that, but hopefully we can give you some tips and continue that conversation. But the last one then is the head. The head is often overlooked within organizations, but this is when we said, hey, get a valid psychometric assessment, look at somebody's kind of their natural wiring, is the way that we like to talk about this, because we're looking for a specific set of skills, yes, but some people with their behavioral tendencies have a much higher likelihood of being more highly engaged if they're doing something that aligns with those natural tendencies. And so we're not talking about personality tests. We're talking about things that measure behavioral traits such as competitiveness or risk or avoidance of risk, things like proactivity versus responsiveness. We could say, wow, this person is more naturally wired to be in a highly compliant function, more backroom. If you put them in a commission-only outside sales, it's not that they can't do it, but they probably will be much less happy and engaged within that function.
Yeah, Mike, and just really quick while you're chatting about this, there's a couple of questions that have come through around behavioral cognitive assessments. Do you want to touch on that briefly? I can say
Sure.
the question and then we'll dive in. But are you aware of behavioral cognitive assessments that work globally in many geographies? And are there any concerns in using such a tool?
There absolutely are several options out there. The thing that you really want to ensure when you're looking at a global option is that everybody is on the same playing field when they complete the assessment, meaning it should be written and validated in several different languages so that people aren't feeling like they have to really make some adjustments just to take the assessment, just for us to get to know who they are. We have to make sure that it's accredited and compliant within a hiring process. That's very big. There are some that on their website will say, do not use this, use a different tool when it comes to hiring. Something like a DISC, for example, on their website, they would say, hey, this is a great management tool, not a great hiring tool. So make sure it's valid. There's actually a checklist that we're going to get into when it comes to assessments later that will probably take care of some of those questions, but yes, they do exist.
Awesome. All right. And then Julie, we will dive in on your question. We might want to connect on that more later, but Julie asked to explain more types of questions in the behavioral cognitive tests from the statistic that we shared earlier. So we can dive into that more. Might be worth maybe a one-off. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, looking at cognitive too, that this is a big one because people often look at these as how smart is somebody? Oh, well, they're not smart. They can't do this job. We actually see physicians, we see scientists, we see people who are, that get typecast as smart people coming in with lower cognitive scores sometimes, because we're looking at something called fluid intelligence versus crystallized intelligence. Fluid is kind of your ability to learn. It's your ability to pivot, kind of think on your feet, complex situations. But then crystallized intelligence is more of what you know and what you've learned over time. And intelligence is a combination of both of those things. So it's kind of your innate ability versus what have you actually learned? And just because it took you longer to learn it doesn't mean you're any less intelligent. So it's really defining and understanding how to use that tool within your process. We can certainly touch more on that as we go. So for now, Sierra, maybe we can dive into hire for performance.
I would love to. This is my favorite thing. So I love talking about hiring for performance because it helps you eliminate your biases. If you are reaching out to people who have 7 years of experience in this one role, you're not evaluating if they're good at that role or not. You're just evaluating how long they've been able to be in that role. So within the hire for performance process, you really align what you're looking for in this role, what the performance objectives are, which we'll get into more in a little bit. And then you set up a process to analyze, assess, and measure whether or not they will be able to perform in the role and perform what you're looking for. And a lot of that can be based on past performance, but it's not based on years of experience, what college they went to, where they grew up, if they were an athlete or not. A lot of those things people think that they add to a candidate, but they end up taking away from the point. There we go. The launch, that part is the prepare, plan, and align. That's where you go beyond the job description. I don't know how many hiring managers there are here, but if you have a job description that says, 10 years of experience, what are some other ones that we see often, Mike?
Oh gosh, can you lift?
Ability to use Excel. There's some other good ones that I'm.
Funny enough, we'll get, they must be able to lift 25 pounds.
Sure.
Yeah. Interesting, seeing some of the things that come through.
Yeah, so you go beyond that and you go into how well they are at doing these things. So it's not about if they can, it's about how well they do it. And somebody with 3 years of experience could outperform somebody with 10 years of experience based on what they've been exposed to in their past and how much of their role currently they're doing those things. And then the evaluation, I think we touched on that, but super important to ask performance-based questions, behaviorally based questions, rather than yes or no questions. We want to dig in and find out about people and what they're able to do. Yes, so the performance profile, this is what I was alluding to. So we want to clearly define quantifiable performance objectives that somebody needs to accomplish within their first 30, 60, 90, 1 year time frame. So this helps candidates and it helps you. It gives you something to evaluate them on and it gives them a target to hit. So the performance profile is twofold. The other piece that it helps you do, especially in the marketplace today, is it helps you develop a strong employee value proposition. If you don't have something to set yourself apart as an organization, you will not attract the best candidates. And that is a bold statement that I'm making, but it's very true. And I want to challenge everyone to take it beyond how great your culture is, because I'm sure everybody feels like they have an awesome culture. I think, right, Mike? We can all say the culture here is amazing, but I think you need to take it beyond that to attract top talent. I think it has to be about what they will add to your team and what you will add to their lives.
Absolutely. And just again, to be clear on this, we're in the launch phase. We spend a lot of time within the launch and making sure that we feel ultimately calibrated up front, because to Sierra's point, this is not an objective process if everybody kind of has their own thing going on and somebody's looking for very different things. We notice it so much in what we call our calibration process. One hiring manager is looking for somebody who is almost doing something completely different than the other. So imagine from the incumbent coming in and not having defined performance objectives, one of them is they're being set up for failure in front of one of those hiring managers. And so these performance objectives are so critical when it comes to saying, okay, are we on the same page? And not only are these just important things to us, but they're all measurable. I promise you that there's always at least 3 measurable components. And some people are like, well, I'm just hiring a lower level position. And it's like, okay, well, if maybe they're answering phones. Well, what are the expectations of quality when it comes to those calls? What happens if they start missing calls? How many are they allowed to miss? There's so many different measurable components that we would look at so that the incumbent can look at this and say, okay, this is what success actually looks like for me in this role. And the hiring manager can say, now we can actually hire, fire, coach based around what our minimum expectations are for that individual. It becomes more objective throughout that process. You know, the other thing I would add as it relates to employee value proposition is just think of yourselves right now. And if a recruiter called you, what would it take for you to leave your current role? If a recruiter said, I've got an opportunity, are you interested in talking to me if we have a clearly superior opportunity to where you're in right now? You're like, wow, yeah, if it's clearly superior, it would have to be X, Y, Z. It would have to give me more flexibility, more money, more job stretch, etc. Well, that should be how this is written. Your employee value proposition should try to hit and satiate the needs of the individuals who are looking at this, because you always want to be almost selling throughout this process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point, Mike. The selling piece, I feel like, is important to note. It is a sales process, and the candidate needs to sell you just as much as you're selling the candidate.
Yes. All right, Sierra, this is kind of the bread and butter of performance-based hiring. So let's talk about this. All
right, this single interview, the single question in an interview. So this is huge. This identifies everything you need to know, but just with a single question. Mike, do you want to say what the question is?
Yes, so it is, what is your most significant accomplishment? Sounds super simple, but most significant accomplishment, it really should be, and we usually give people some time. You're like, hey, we're going to ask a lot of follow-up questions on this, but what is your most significant professional accomplishment? And the reason why it's just a potent question, because it helps us identify several different things. What are they passionate about? Why was it important to them? How is this aligning, with the culture that we have, but also does it highlight and showcase that they've done certain elements of that role before? And so what we do then is, after they give us that, we can start asking questions like, great, who was involved? What was your biggest challenge throughout that time? What were you the most proud of? What were the biggest areas of conflict and how did you overcome them? What were the awards or rewards that you were given after that? That's how we can really drill into this, and it becomes super powerful for us.
Yeah. There's a lot of other questions that come when people are answering that you will inevitably ask, but it at least gives you structure for your question. It gives you something that you're asking every single candidate every time, and then you can equally compare candidates. I think I saw a question come in somewhere about a point system. This will also, yes, you can have a point system, but this helps you evaluate on a more even playing field performance versus letting some bias get in.
Definitely. Yeah. To that point system question. So we are seeing a lot of questions coming through. So thank you. And please keep them coming. We're going to try to get to all of them more towards the end, but that's a great question that kind of ties directly into this. The point system is something we do actually use. And the way we use it isn't for necessarily a letter grade. It's more of our confidence score. Is how confident are we that this individual is able to do and achieve and accomplish the things that the performance objectives outline it. And we look at head, heart, and briefcase and actually score each of those areas. And another big reason why the point system is really useful for us is, now if Sierra interviews them and gives them a certain score, and I interview them and give them a certain score, and it's vastly different, we can better understand where we're misaligned even throughout the process.
Yep. And then, if you are seeing huge discrepancies, you come back together and align before you move forward. List out your core values. Yeah, this is important as you as we're talking about aligning, listing out your core values and how you'll measure them is super important as an organization. If you don't have core values, you might want to sit down and think about that. I think if you don't have core values, maybe sit down as a hiring manager and say, what are my core values? What are the core values of this group? That way we're aligning on values. I think some of these questions, what are some of the reasons someone wanting this job that you would find attractive or not? Identifying that before you go into an interview, I feel like is really important so that you're not having gut reactions. Knowing that if someone said, well, I really just want a promotion, if that's going to trigger you, it's important to identify that ahead of time, I think. And this is my favorite question. What diverse thought or perspective are you missing out on that could benefit your organization? I've definitely heard this question before, which is, how do I know what I'm missing? So I think to counter that, work backwards. What thought do we have now? Where are people coming from? How do people approach questions now? And then work backwards from that so that you know what you need in your organization. Fair to say, Mike?
Sorry, Sierra, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'm going to say this is probably one of the biggest elements of where we can improve regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion, because like we talked about at the top of the webinar is so many people say, we need this person to fit our culture. I think we've heard cultural fit over the last few months more than anything else. And while that's great, we want, to make sure that you maintain, the positivity and the engagement that you have. But the issue with saying cultural fit is nothing's changing positively within the organization. Diversity of thought isn't necessarily being encouraged. It almost promotes status quo. So the terminology that we would say is a cultural addition to your team, right? So we're looking at somebody who, and this comes from value alignment. And that's why Sierra said that it is so important to define your core values. Is what is the most important things to you? What would you actually, outside of results, what would you actually put somebody on a plan or let them go if they breached what values? And so those should be front and center, and they should be defined, because passion and integrity and accountability, those can mean different things to different people. And if you're going to call somebody out on those, it really needs to be defined. And so that's why it can really help you, say, hey, we're looking for value alignment instead of just cultural fit.
Yeah, I love that, culture addition. I think it's so important to remember that we don't need to surround ourselves with people that are just like us. We need to look for the addition. Measuring the heart, crafting interview questions to measure candidates' values, motivators and interests, and then focusing on culture add, like we said, over culture fit for increased diversity. So crafting these interview questions, I think, Mike, crafting these, people can get caught up in. How do we really find out these things about candidates' values, motivators, interests? And I think a lot of that comes from getting to know candidates. We lost the slides, just so you know. We're having technical difficulties.
That's my fault. My internet went out briefly. Am I back?
You're back. Hello. So crafting these questions, Mike, do we have some good tips as far as how to craft?
Yes. So this is a little bit more where I think getting some sort of third-party consultation is very valuable. It helps you kind of think outside of the normal scope. But generally speaking, I think one of the easiest questions that you can insert is simply saying, hey, we believe really strongly in integrity, and defining what integrity means. Can you talk about a time that you've demonstrated integrity within your role and when that was even questioned? And so it's specific to the value that you have, and asking questions around it, kind of like what we talked about with the most significant accomplishment question, is once you get an understanding of that situation, now you can say, all right, who is involved? Why was it difficult for you? What was the main areas of conflict? You have several different interview questions that can stem from that overall question that usually is very useful when it comes to analyzing somebody's heart and value alignment.
Yeah, and there's a question that came in about culture add versus culture fit.
Yeah.
From my perspective, culture fit is people who match our culture. Culture add means people who are aligned in value, but bring something more to our culture, bring a different perspective, different ideas, different thought. That is what I would consider an add versus a fit.
Yeah.
Mike, do you want to add to that? I don't know if hopefully I'm answering that question the way you were looking for it to be answered.
Yeah, I think what people are really looking for too is what specific questions, can we ask to make sure that it is a cultural add versus a cultural fit. We'll follow up with that. We've got a pretty good list of interview questions, and knowing that we're saying, hey, we're looking for diversity of thought. We're looking for that addition to our team. Let us give you some food for thought on that one. We can follow up. So this is where we're talking about the assessments, right? So we're looking at that, again, behavioral tendencies as well as cognitive ability. There was a question about, I've heard that using assessment tools can cause candidates to sue for discrimination based on the results. How do you get around this? Great question. Make sure that you're using an assessment that has not been sued for discrimination before. That is step one, is do your research, make sure that this is a long-standing assessment tool, make sure that you are able to use this within an interview process and that it adheres to the standards of your state and your country. The big thing that we do though is making sure that you don't use this as a sole disqualification tool. If you use it as a sole disqualification tool, that is actually not only it is actually subjective because you're not looking at the whole person, but it is also not particularly legal, right? We don't want to make sure that you get into a situation where you're using this as your end all be all. But again, 33% of the equation, it's a very powerful data point when it comes to head, heart, and briefcase. The way that we want to use it, as well as making sure we communicate upfront with candidates and saying, hey, this is not a sole disqualification tool. We want to use this to actually more enhance our interview process with you. We're going to ask you different interview questions based on some of the alignments and misalignments that we see. And so that's step one. That is the other step, is making sure that they can understand that it's safe and that they should be able to take it without fear that they're going to get removed from the process. So we usually say, as the next step in the process, as we're setting up the next step or the next interview, that's when we ask somebody to take it. Having somebody take it up front is kind of a knockoff, is very difficult. And that's where it becomes more dangerous. So hopefully we're answering the question for you. But that is certainly the way that we are going to at least tee it up for now. And we're going to keep getting to some of the questions that come in as we go. So the way that we make sure that there's some objectivity up front is we use something called the Predictive Index as our assessment tool. And the reason why we really like this, and whatever you use, make sure that you're leveraging an ability to have some sort of a benchmark to compare information to. So when a candidate comes through, you're not just looking at their behavioral assessment and saying, ooh, I like this, because that is a very biased opinion. What we want to do is, number one, there is a lot of tools that will have benchmarks specific to an industry or specific to a role. That's great. That's something that you can use to leverage. There's other tools where you can actually have the stakeholders, people like human resources or hiring managers, top performers within that role. They can say what they feel is the most important, and you can calibrate from there and create that more objective benchmark that we're now comparing the candidate to. This is probably one of the more important things, is just looking at an assessment alone and making an assumption on that individual can inherently be very biased. And it's important to know that you don't want to typecast somebody just based off of that. You don't want to restrain them or restrict them from opportunities because of what their profile has. And it can be in the wrong hands. These can certainly be dangerous. But that's why, on the other hand, it's also very powerful, is now we can say, all right, let's measure what actually matters to us. In this particular example, we would say, all right, we are looking for somebody who's very highly proactive, somebody who naturally can take initiative, they're competitive, they're driven. We want them to be very quick to connect and persuasive. They're in talent acquisition. So we're looking for, somebody who's leading a team of recruiters. So we need for them to be fluent and more gregarious, somebody that's going to be able to get people to kind of earn trust very quickly. We also want there to be some level of follow-up and thoroughness and detail. And so we agree upon that as a team. And then we can look at the candidate and say, they have a lot of those attributes. However, there's a little bit of a misalignment that we see. This person's actually a little bit more introspective, or they're going to take a little bit more time to connect. It would probably be worth our time adding that within our interview process, adding some of those interview questions and saying, okay, what is your level of, what we would say, dominance? What is your level of persuasion within a role? How have you done it before? We can actually dig in based on those misalignments, not by just automatically disqualifying them, but are there any flags that come up within that process due to some of the misalignments that we see? So this, again, should be inserted as part of that process. And if I go back, it's very similar to that cognitive ability. We would set a target for what we're looking for. What is our internal bandwidth, custom to us? What does our mentorship program look like? What's our onboarding program look like? What level of learning ability would be really naturally successful within this role? And where does the candidate fall? Because now we can actually set them up much, much more effectively when it comes to onboarding and when it comes to the next steps within that process. We can even ask interview questions around, hey, what is your preferred learning style? What does support look like? Can we talk to previous managers that you've reported into before so we can get a better idea of how we can best support you if we bring you on? There's a variety of different ways that we can insert that into our process.
Yeah, Mike, I think it's what you just said is really important to note. We want to ask questions around this so that we're not putting people into buckets based on their behavior profile. We want to dig in. We want to find out how they perform in jobs in certain scenarios, and utilizing this data point helps us ask those people the right questions. But I just want to say again, for the record, you still have to interview around this and not put people into buckets based on it.
Yeah, and actually this should hopefully help us avoid these people are like us sort of branding that we can put on people. Is most assessment tools that are objective, you can look at a group of people and say, you look at some analytics and say, wow, we don't have a lot of almost diversity of thought. We have a lot of people that are maybe, so I look at our own internal leadership team, very driving, very impatient, very results focused, not a whole lot of warm and fuzzy or attention to detail. So when it comes to company rollouts, or when it comes to some more of that HR function, it's a gap and it's a weakness. And we know that based on some of that information, who's going to be our internal champion for it. It might be great to interview around that, understanding ourselves, having that level of self-awareness, and making sure you insert something like that into your process. These should really, really be self-awareness tools. Increasing your objectivity will increase your diversity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great point.
So just a quick thing. So when you are looking at assessment, again, make sure it's accredited, make sure that it's trusted. Again, we went with PI because it is trusted by so many different global partners. And we went through this checklist when it came to selecting an assessment tool. And we'll send this to you as well. If you want to have a conversation about it, that's completely fine. Even if it's simply along the lines of, is my assessment tool okay to use within a process? That's something we consult around quite frequently. So has it been validated? And has it been validated outside of the person who's selling it? That's the big thing, is you need to have a third party science team that's there to be able to say, hey, this is valid. You're able to use this. Does it adhere to compliance standards? That's really, really important. Is this something that will accommodate for diversity? And when we say diversity, let's talk about things like some physical ailments like blindness. Do you have the ability to send the assessment in Braille? Do you have the ability for somebody that's their native language is not English or Spanish or French? Are you able to provide this in any language that they're going to be the most comfortable with, both behaviorally and cognitively? So if I think of a level playing ground, if I tried to take the assessment outside of English, I'd be in big trouble, and that probably would knock me down the ranks on a lot of organizations that use these tools. So we want to make sure that these are proven to be culturally neutral. What kind of science, what kind of research has gone into that assessment to ensure that it is actually culturally neutral? There is no such thing as a court-proof assessment. There are people that can get upset about it, but as long as you go into your process being explicit with candidates and how you're going to use it and being upfront and not using it as a sole disqualifier, there is no grounds. In fact, so that's a big thing of why we use PI. They've been around since 1955, never been successfully sued for discrimination within the process. So important to be able to look into that sort of information as well. That's you can look at the rest. We'll send this out to you, but really want to make sure that you have some knowledge on what is appropriate and what is compliant when it comes to the world of assessments, because there is a bit of a misnomer with them. And I know people's eyes sometimes roll back in their heads when they think of assessments. When used correctly, they can be very, very powerful for us. And then the last piece on any assessment that you choose, make sure that it is a holistic solution. If you're investing in a tool, make sure that it's something that you're able to use, maybe even outside of the hiring selection process. Can you use it to onboard? Can you use it to look at your teams and keep them engaged? That's very, very big, is once you find your, more diversity of thought, once you find the candidates that are perfect for you, retain them. That is very, very important. So invest in those particular areas. So just speaking to the kind of the process that we use, Sierra, this is your specialty.
Specialty. I don't know. Measuring the candidate portfolio, taking into account all of the data and not just one piece of it. So we include the head piece, we include the heart, all of the questions there, and then we dive in on the briefcase and the performance based questions, digging in with candidates about how well they will be able to do the job. You'll see our scorecard there, the person that asked about the points. We do go through and rank match fit, or our, Mike, how did you phrase it? Our confidence score. So we rate out confidence based on the answers, not, we're not doing a point score on the candidate. I think that, and then we also do kind of a summary, just so at first glance, knowing that not very many hiring managers do a deep dive. I think I saw a question in there about removing a name. Did I see that question? Removing a name from a candidate or from the presentation? Yeah.
The question about taking names off of resumes when presenting them to hiring managers to remove bias.
Yes, I am all for that. Jonathan, what do you think? I read a statistic. I wish that I had it in front of me, but I think it's something like 60% of resumes with a name that doesn't sound, that's an unusual name, gets rejected.
Interesting.
Without
I think one of for those of you who were on last week, you'll remember this from the webinar we did, which I thought this was a great takeaway. The team that we had on from a company called Amplify, they said before every single interview they go into, they do a bias refresher, a bias training refresher. And it's just to become more aware. Every single one of us have bias, but to actually do a refresher so that more aware we can become of those things. So if there are things we can do to remove bias and then also supplement that with bias awareness and training is going to be really helpful. So if it's, I just think the more awareness that we can have around our own bias, it's very, very important. So if you want to take the names off because you think that's the issue or that will help, I don't know why you wouldn't go for that. It's just something to be aware of. That's all. All right, I'm going to fire away a few more questions here at this team. If assessments are undertaken using different languages, how can you assess performance when not using a second language?
Can you rephrase?
Yeah, Delroy, do you mind rephrasing that? You can put it in chat or just a bit more clarity around that would be helpful. So, okay, somebody asked a question around the behavioral assessment tool specifically the Titus uses for interviews, or does that vary? So when we talk about the head, the heart, and the briefcase, we say the head is assessing workplace behaviors and cognitive ramp up ability. And as Mike covered that. So when we talk about using that, we would say, use something. Just use something. Use something that's valid and answer all of those questions that Mike and Sierra covered. We happen to have landed after there's a lot of research. We chose Predictive Index because we didn't want a weed out tool. We wanted a tool that came from strength-based understanding of people that could be used massively in post-hire engagement, retention, customized onboarding, coaching. A lot of, in the United States anyway, over half the workforce are in the millennial and Gen Z category. And a lot of them are first-time managers and leaders. So because of the 10,000 boomers a day retiring in the United States, there's a lot of brain drain, and coaching for managers who love young managers who are, or first-time managers who are saying, I want coaching, I want mentorship, I want development. This is a tool that helps people use very, very pragmatically and very user-friendly. So that's why we landed on Predictive Index. This isn't a sales pitch, but full transparency, it is something that we implement at companies all over the country. Good question. All right. Have there been studies that show, that's a good question. I'd have to get back to you on that one, sorry. Hopefully worded better now. If assessments are undertaken using different languages, how can you predict performance when not using a second language?
Got it. So basically, what we're really inquiring about is if they're taking it in their native language, how do we know that their performance will not suffer if they're going to be exclusively using another language? It's really what we're looking at is, it's a different element. When we're looking at the head, it's their natural behavioral tendencies. It's naturally how they're wired. It's not have they done this job before. It's not have they interacted in a different environment with different languages before. It's quite simply, what are their natural tendencies that allow them to do their job, right? So when we look at somebody who is naturally highly proactive, it's nothing to do with their language. When we ask if somebody is more competitive, or they're very risk averse and they're very highly detailed sort of person, it's going to be how they go about learning, how they go about adjusting, and how they go about accomplishing their task. So that's why we look at it very independently from anything else. It's that natural wiring that gives us an idea of how are they going to go about doing their job. So hopefully that answered the question.
That's great. Thanks, Mike. Another question will be, should hiring decisions be based on those who score highest only?
Sierra?
When I read that, I thought the score is an additional data point. It is not the whole picture. So I think it's an important data point, but I don't think that it gives the full picture unless you're scoring based on everything that you've been through with the interview and the candidate's performance and all of that.
I'll add something to that. It's great. I think people talk about the science of hiring, and I just think, that's rubbish. Hiring isn't a science. We're dealing with people. Every one of us on this call here, the hundreds of people who've joined this webinar here today, all woke up with something going on in their life that's affecting their psyche, the way they think and the way they approached today. And then each one of us are going to do something right after this in the next 5 or 10 minutes as we transition to the next thing. We're dealing with people. People have feelings, people have emotions. So we've done our best. Our question that we started answering was, how do we guarantee quality of hire? I think, well, what is quality of hire? So we defined it as the job getting done. What is the job that needs to get done? And we looked at the anniversary date. So we said, by day 365, what needs to get done? And so we can define what the job is, but then there's so much more to it, that the how that gets done, and the why, and the behaviors, and then the team dynamic. So the head, the heart, the briefcase was just an evolution of us trying to understand the whole person. And then how does that whole person fit in with the whole team of other people? And so that's why Predictive Index has been really, really helpful for us to understand team dynamics as well. But it is not just coming down to a pure score, it's understanding data points. And so hiring is not a science, no matter how perfect you get it at the beginning. People change, and everyone has their heart and why, where they're going. We talk about stay interviews. A lot of companies talk about stay interviews. We have quarterly conversations. A part of that, our quarterly conversations follow through the same logic of what's going on in your head, behaviors, development there, your values, what's next from your progression, and then your career progression, which is like the briefcase stuff. How are we developing you for the next career move? And if you were to consider moving and leaving, what would you be going to? Because we want to try and provide it for you here. So it's dialing all of those things in on a day-to-day basis. But right now on the screen here, you have a QR code. If you're not familiar with QR codes, I'll just explain for everyone else. Use it as you see fit here. Point and shoot your camera. You don't need to take a picture. Just point it at the screen, and it will open up a web page. And on that web page, it's going to give you a bunch of little things where you can check boxes if you want anything. You want the slides to be sent to you. You want an introduction to Mike or Sierra or any of our team. If you would like information on any of the other sessions we did. If you want more thorough, another session just to talk personally about what's going on in your organization, we would love to help. Lastly, complimentary. We will happily give you the Predictive Index behavior assessment. It'll take you 5 or 6 minutes. You can see how it works and give you a follow-up kind of session where we show you the platform of how we use it in our hiring to reduce bias and all of that good stuff. So,
Jonathan, real quick, can I jump in? Just I've seen a couple more questions about the resume, the redacting. We can dive in more on that later, but I will say the redacting, depending on what your goal is with redacting, that is how you will determine if it works or not. I've seen questions on if it actually works. If your goal is to eliminate name bias from the hiring process, then for sure redact the name, it will work. But if you don't know what your goal is in redacting that information, or if you're trying to redact what college they went to remove that bias or whatever the case is, then by all means, I think it will work. But if you don't know what the goal is, then don't do it. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's good. Mike, do you want to add to that?
No, that is not my expertise.
Okay, sorry. I saw a note here that said Mike would like to answer this one personally. I was like, okay, great. I didn't know that was your expertise either. But
Jonathan, did you see the question about motivational fit?
I know. No.
Tim, I'm going to read it, and I would love for you to chime in, and then I can too. But one element of this process that I feel is really important is what I call motivational fit. I define this as how motivated and happy with the prospective candidate will be in the role we are seeking to fill. How do you effectively integrate this to what you have shared today?
Yeah, I mean that's the big section in the middle we call heart, like their motivators and their values, etc. I think the big thing for us is this, and I'll go fast because I know we've got a few minutes left here, and we might like to give transition time between next meetings for people. But motivational fit for us is A players and even B players make career moves very differently than C's and D's. So when you want to hire somebody who's going to get the job done, typically speaking, they're not going for a complete lateral move. So the day one, there needs to be a bigger job than they've done before. They need to see the future and the career trajectory or the growth trajectory and see how it's going to keep them motivated in the future to grow in their professional career. Just a side note, over 55% of people who resign companies leave sober for career growth and development opportunities. So there's a challenge that was shown to them, a growth challenge that they didn't have in their current role, or at least they didn't know it was there. And nobody was talking to them about it. So getting these people to dial into motivational fit is really important. The other third component that we look for is impact. That they see that they can make an impact on your organization, and your organization makes an impact on them or the world around them. If you can get those three things right, dialing the motivational fit works great. The problem with, another question popped up here, was around AI, how we use AI in interview processes. I'll just take it down to a really base level of any job board service, whether it be LinkedIn, Monster, Career Builder, any of those boards. What they're going to do is match keywords to keywords. So they say, here's a perfect match, 100% hit match on your job posting versus the resume. The problem with that is this. It's matching it to their past, not their future. People are typically not motivated by their past. They're motivated by what will be, what could be, what the possibility is. So their achiever pattern of where they're going to go next, they've never done it before. So if you match purely on keywords to somebody's past, you may not be getting a top performer. You may be attracting somebody who's running from something or running to something. So these are some of the things we do around motivational fit. And I'm sure Mike and Sierra have other things to add on that.
No, I thought that was great. I read the question differently than you, which is shocking. We have different perspectives, but I read it as, how do we determine how motivated someone will be in their role? And I definitely wanted to dig in on that, because I don't know that it's up to us to determine how motivated they will be in the role once they get into it. I don't know how we can identify that outside of, Jonathan, what you were talking about, which is getting to know the whole person and aligning the right role for the right person.
Yeah, I mean, here's the other one. You can ask people, right? Where do you want to go? What's next for you?
Yeah.
And what's your future? And I know it's kind of, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Statistically, they're not going to be with you in 5 years. So the average tenure for boomers is 7 years. For millennials, it's less than 2 years. For Gen Z, it's 1. So if statistically, you've got a couple of years, 1 to 2 years with somebody. So don't ask them where they want to be in 5 years. Say, where do you want to be in 1 or 2 years? Because we have a very, very short-sighted temporal generation right now. We get bored. The Gen Z get bored within 6 weeks on the job, meaning they think they've mastered it. What? It's an understanding of just very, very fast pace. And so we have to dial those people in on a short term. So long-term motivations are not the best. I don't think those are the best interview questions. Where do you want to be in 5 years? I would say, where do you want to be in 18 months? And how do I help you get there? And we hope it's with us, but it might not be. So anything else? I think questions are coming here. Anything else to add from you, Mike?
No, not at this time. The big thing is making sure that whatever we do, it is about that cultural addition more than anything else, and making sure that we are wholeheartedly looking into this as we want to enhance we want to kind of remove the current lens that we're seeing the world, seeing the workplace. And I think having that objective process is a great way to start your journey.
Brilliant. Sierra, any final words from you?
Not as brilliant as Mike. No, I think it's great. I think it's important to remember to be aware of your biases, identify them, know what you're lacking, and interview around that.
Fantastic. Well, I want to say a massive thank you for everyone who joined here. I know the people are rushing to next appointments. It's a privilege to open up our kind of insight into our company on our journey. We are experts in many things around talent. This diversity, equity, inclusion is big. We feel like we're taking beginning of our journey here, and it's a privilege to share this with you. Anything that we have by way of resources, we offer them to you. Please do just reach out. Have a great rest of the week, and thank you for joining.